It started with a story that felt like it belonged in fairy tales, but it was real, raw, and nothing like the polished pages of a book. I never thought my path would cross with his, let alone that my heart would be drawn into something so forbidden, so magnetic, and so life-changing. He wasn't just any man. He was a prince, bound by duty, tradition, and expectations that went far beyond either of us. But sometimes, life brings you face to face with feelings you cannot control, and no crown or title can protect you from the truth of love. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more stories filled with passion, resilience, and the unexpected twists of life. Because once I tell you what happened between me and the prince, you'll realize that love doesn't care about status, bloodlines, or boundaries. It only cares about the undeniable pull between two souls. I never believed life could shift so suddenly, in a way that one moment seems ordinary and the next feels like it belongs to a world you never imagined yourself entering. My story began on a quiet autumn evening at a gala I had only been invited to because my employer, an art restorer for private collections, couldn't attend. I had stepped in as his assistant, a simple face among many distinguished guests. The invitation alone felt like a golden ticket into a sphere far above my own. The ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers, the golden light bouncing off polished marble floors and the rich velvet drapes. Conversations hummed like a low symphony, interrupted only by the clink of champagne flutes and soft laughter. I lingered near the back, trying not to feel out of place in my modest black suit, when the room shifted in energy. Heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire, and all eyes focused on the tall man entering through the grand archway. It was Prince Adrian. I had seen his face before, on television, in newspapers, gracing glossy magazines, but the images never captured what it was like to see him in person. His presence carried weight. Dark hair swept neatly back, sharp jawline, and a posture that radiated both authority and grace. But what struck me most was his eyes, deep hazel with flecks of gold, eyes that seemed to see more than what they should. I thought someone like him would walk past without noticing me. But when he moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging polite words, his gaze locked on mine for a fraction longer than polite protocol allowed. My heart stumbled in my chest. He nodded slightly, a gesture so subtle that it could have been imagined, but I felt it. Later that night, while I stood by a display of Renaissance sketches, he appeared beside me. "You don't look like you belong to this crowd," he said quietly, his tone low and surprisingly playful. I nearly choked on my sip of champagne. "Is it that obvious?" I replied, trying to mask my nerves with humor. His lips curved into a half-smile. "Obvious, but refreshing. Most here are desperate to belong. You seem like you couldn't care less." I didn't know what to say, so I laughed softly. "Maybe because I don't belong." He studied me, not with the aloofness I expected from royalty, but with genuine curiosity. For a few minutes, we spoke about art, about brushstrokes, history, and the way paintings hold secrets centuries old. His knowledge impressed me, but more than that, his ease did. He wasn't the untouchable figure the world portrayed. He was human. The moment ended abruptly when an aide approached him, reminding him of his duties. He left with a polite nod, but not before his eyes lingered on me once more. It was the kind of look that planted something dangerous inside me, a seed of longing I hadn't expected. Days passed, and I told myself it had been nothing. A fleeting exchange. He was a prince, after all, and I was no one of consequence. But then, a week later, I received a letter. A handwritten note, sealed with an emblem I recognized instantly. "Meet me at the gardens near St. Andrew's Chapel. Midnight. A." I reread the words over and over, my pulse racing. Every rational thought screamed that this was reckless. But desire is rarely rational, and curiosity burns hotter than caution. When midnight came, I found myself walking beneath the moonlit arches of the chapel gardens. The air was cool, carrying the scent of roses and damp earth. And there he was, standing near a stone fountain, his hands in his pockets, looking less like a prince and more like a man waiting for something he wasn't sure he should want. "You came," he said, almost as if he hadn't expected me to. "How could I not?" I whispered back, my voice betraying the nervous storm inside me. We talked for hours under the stars, our voices low, laughter breaking the tension now and then. He told me about the weight of expectations, how his life was measured in public appearances and scripted words. I told him about my quiet existence, about the art I loved, and the longing I carried to do something that mattered. The clock struck 2 before either of us realized how much time had passed. He stepped closer, the air between us charged with unspoken possibility. His eyes searched mine, as if asking for permission, or perhaps testing my resolve. Before anything could happen, a sound broke through the silence, the snap of a twig nearby. He tensed, scanning the shadows. We weren't alone. Go, he said quickly, his tone shifting to one of command. Now. I wanted to protest, but his urgency left no room. I slipped out of the gardens, my heart racing, my mind replaying every word, every look. That night, lying awake in my small apartment, I realized something terrifying. I was already in too deep. And yet, even as I told myself to forget him, I knew it was too late. I had tasted something forbidden, something irresistible. And the thought that someone might have seen us lingered like a storm on the horizon. I didn't know then what it would cost me, or him. But I knew this was only the beginning. I barely slept after that night. My mind replayed every detail, the flicker of candlelight reflected in his eyes, the soft timbre of his voice as he shared secrets he had likely never spoken aloud before, and the sudden snap of a twig that shattered the illusion of safety. Whoever had been in those gardens might have seen us, might have heard us. And if they had, what would it mean for him? For me? The morning sun streamed through my apartment window, but it felt like a spotlight exposing everything I wanted to hide. My hands shook as I poured coffee, each sip doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. I told myself I should walk away, that if I cared at all about him, I would let that night be nothing more than a memory. But the truth was I couldn't. My heart was already tethered to him, pulled by an invisible force I didn't fully understand. 2 days later, another letter arrived. Slipped under my door this time, as if he knew how dangerous it was to leave any trace. The handwriting was the same, elegant and deliberate. Tonight. Same place. Midnight. I stared at the note for what felt like hours, weighing the risks. Every instinct warned me to stay away. And yet, as the church bells struck 12, I found myself once again walking beneath the arches of St. Andrew's Chapel, the shadows long and heavy under the moonlight. He was already there, standing near the fountain where we had spoken before. His expression was tense, his posture straighter than before, as though he carried the weight of unseen eyes even here. You shouldn't have come, he said softly when I approached, though the relief in his eyes betrayed his words. Then why did you ask me to? I countered, my voice steadier than I felt. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. Because I can't stop thinking about you. And that terrifies me. My chest tightened. Hearing those words I hadn't dared imagine, ignited something dangerous inside me. I feel the same, I admitted, barely above a breath. For a moment, silence stretched between us, filled only by the rustling of leaves and the distant toll of a bell. Then his hand brushed against mine, tentative at first, as though testing whether I'd pull away. I didn't. The contact was brief, but it felt like fire, sparking through me in a way that left no doubt about what I wanted. But just as quickly he withdrew, glancing toward the chapel's looming walls. There are eyes everywhere, he said. Advisors. Guards. People who would twist even an innocent meeting into scandal. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Then why risk it? He met my gaze, and in his eyes I saw something raw, something stripped of titles and crowns. Because for once in my life, I want something that isn't chosen for me. The words settled heavy in my chest, pulling me closer to him even as fear pulled me back. I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. How could someone like him, someone born into privilege and bound by duty, truly want me, a man whose life barely brushed the edges of his world? Before I could ask, footsteps echoed faintly through the garden. He stiffened, eyes narrowing as he grabbed my wrist gently. This way, he urged, pulling me toward a hidden archway covered in ivy. We slipped into a narrow corridor behind the chapel, the stone walls cool and damp against my shoulder as we pressed close together, hidden from sight. The footsteps grew louder, then paused. A voice carried through the night, low and sharp, though the words were muffled. Whoever it was, they lingered, their presence a threat neither of us could ignore. His hand remained around my wrist, firm but not painful, his breath quick and warm against my ear. For a few endless seconds, we stayed frozen, waiting. The footsteps eventually faded, swallowed by the night, but the fear they left behind lingered. When he finally released me, his face was pale in the moonlight. "Do you see now?" he said, his voice urgent. "This isn't just about us. If anyone finds out, it could destroy everything." "I understand," I said, though my voice trembled. "But do you regret it?" He hesitated, searching my eyes, then shook his head. "Not for a second." That confession was both a balm and a wound. Relief flooded me, but so did the sharp ache of knowing what lay ahead. Nothing about this would be simple. Every moment would be a gamble, every glance a risk. We parted ways before dawn, slipping back into our separate worlds as if nothing had happened. But the truth was, everything had changed. The next week, I tried to lose myself in work, restoring faded brushstrokes and repairing fragile canvases. But my thoughts returned to him constantly. Every smile, every glance, every word replayed like a song I couldn't silence. I caught myself wondering what it would be like to hold him without fear, to exist together without shadows or secrecy. Yet reality crept in like an unwelcome guest. I overheard whispers at the gallery where I worked, rumors of the prince being seen late at night, his reputation questioned, his advisors growing restless. Though no one mentioned me, I felt the walls closing in. That evening, I found another note waiting for me, tucked carefully behind a book on my shelf. My heart raced as I unfolded it. This cannot last in shadows forever. I must decide what kind of man I want to be. Meet me tomorrow. Hey. The words struck me with equal parts hope and dread. Was this an invitation to something more, or the beginning of the end? I lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if love could truly survive under so much weight. By the time dawn broke, I knew one thing for certain: tomorrow would change everything. The letter stayed folded in my pocket all day, burning like a live ember against my leg. I touched it more times than I cared to admit, tracing the crease where his name signed off. Just the initial, but it was enough. Meet me tomorrow. Those words replayed in my mind until they drowned out everything else. The chatter of tourists in the gallery, the quiet hum of the lights above, even the crackle of the radio left on in the restoration studio. Tomorrow had come. I walked through the city streets with a sense of unreality. The sky was overcast, clouds hanging low as if pressing down on the world. My chest felt just as heavy. His message wasn't just an invitation. It was a declaration, a turning point. He had to choose between what was expected of him and what he wanted for himself. And somehow, I was tangled in the middle of it. By the time I reached the rendezvous point, a secluded library annex at the far edge of the palace grounds, I was drenched in sweat despite the cool air. The place was deserted, its massive wooden doors closed to the public, giving it the air of a sanctuary. I pushed them open and stepped into silence. He was there, waiting. Adrian stood in the pale glow of stained glass light, his jacket discarded over the back of a chair. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, the faintest tension visible in the way his jaw clenched. When he turned at the sound of my steps, his eyes carried both relief and storm. "You came," he said softly. "I wasn't sure I should," I admitted. "But you asked." He nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line before he exhaled. "I don't want to hide anymore." The word struck me like thunder. My breath caught. "You mean?" "I've lived my whole life behind walls," he interrupted, stepping closer. "Every smile rehearsed, every word measured. And then you appear, and suddenly those walls feel like a prison. I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is a secret I should bury." I felt my knees weaken. Part of me had longed to hear this, to believe it was possible. But another part, the louder part, was afraid. "Adrian, think about what you're saying. If this gets out." He cut me off again, though more gently this time. I have thought about it, more than you know, and I realize that the fear will never end unless I face it. I searched his eyes, desperate for clarity. So what are you asking of me? He took my hands in his, warm and steady despite the storm between us. I'm asking you to trust me, to let me choose you, even if it means choosing against everything else. For a moment, time stopped. The stained glass windows painted him in shades of crimson and gold, like some figure from a legend, though the man before me was no saint, just someone as human and flawed and frightened as I was. And maybe that was why I believed him. But the doubts still clawed at me. Adrian, if you go through with this, your family, the press, the world, they'll tear you apart. They'll tear us apart. His grip tightened. Then let them try. Because I'd rather be broken in truth than whole in a lie. The silence that followed was thick with meaning. My heart hammered in my chest as if urging me to take the leap, to believe in something larger than fear. Slowly I nodded. Then I'm with you. Whatever comes. The relief in his expression was immediate, almost boyish. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against mine, his breath uneven but filled with something I hadn't felt from him before, certainty. We stayed like that for a long moment, the world outside forgotten. But it couldn't stay forgotten for long. A sharp noise broke the quiet, the unmistakable creak of the annex's heavy door. Both our heads snapped up. A shadow moved across the entryway, followed by the sound of deliberate footsteps. Adrian's hand slipped from mine, his posture straightening in an instant. But his eyes flicked toward me with urgency. Hide. I ducked behind one of the massive bookshelves just as a man entered the hall. His uniform gave him away, one of the royal advisors, sharp-eyed and rigid. His gaze swept across the room, pausing on Adrian. Your Highness, the man said, his tone clipped. I was told you'd be here. Adrian forced a calm smile. Just reading, he replied, gesturing to the books around him. The advisor's eyes narrowed, scanning the room with suspicion. My pulse pounded as I pressed myself against the cold wood, willing myself invisible. You know the council grows restless, the advisor continued. Late nights, unexplained absences, it raises questions. Dangerous ones. Adrian's jaw flexed, but his voice remained steady. My private time is not up for discussion. The man lingered, his gaze still prowling. For a terrible moment, I thought he might circle the shelves and find me. But after a tense silence, he inclined his head stiffly. Of course, Your Highness. Just remember, the kingdom watches everything. When the advisor finally left, the doors closing behind him, I exhaled so sharply it hurt. Adrian appeared around the corner a moment later, his face pale but determined. You see, he said, voice low, this is what we're up against. I nodded, my chest tight with fear, and something else. Admiration. Because despite the risk, despite the danger, he hadn't flinched. But his next words cut through me like a blade. I need to tell them, he whispered. My family. The world. I can't hide you anymore. My heart surged and plummeted all at once. It was everything I wanted, but also everything I feared. Could we withstand the storm waiting for us? Or would this fragile, impossible thing between us be shattered before it ever had a chance to bloom? As he took my hand again, his eyes locked on mine, I knew one thing for certain. The next step would change both of our lives forever. And there was no going back. The palace bells echoed faintly through the city as I walked across the cobbled courtyard toward the back gate. My hood was pulled low, more out of instinct than disguise. Ever since the advisor had nearly caught me in the library, I felt eyes everywhere. Each guard posted at the gate seemed sharper, every passerby on the street a little too curious. Adrian had been right. We were up against more than whispers. We were up against a system built to bury anything that didn't fit its mold. I was halfway to the cafe we had agreed to meet at when I saw him. No guards, no entourage. Just Adrian, waiting on the quiet terrace of a tucked-away coffee shop that smelled faintly of roasted beans and fresh rain. He looked nothing like the polished figure the public adored. His jacket was plain, his hair a little unruly, his hands restless against the mug in front of him. And yet, to me, he had never looked more regal. You came, he said as I sat down. His voice held that same mix of relief and weight I had heard in the library. I almost didn't, I admitted. Feels like every shadow's watching us now. His lips quirked into a sad smile. They are. But shadows don't decide who we are. We do. I studied him for a long moment, the man behind the crown. Then what happens next? You said you wanted to tell them. Were you serious, or was that just adrenaline talking? Adrian leaned back, exhaling as though the words themselves were heavy. I was serious. I've spent my whole life pretending to be someone they could control. I won't keep doing it. Not for them. Not for the council. Not for the crown. If I choose to love you, then it has to be in the light. The words should have set me free, but instead they chained me to fear. Adrian, if you stand up and announce this, it won't just be your life that changes. It'll be mine. My family's. People will know my face, my name. The press will devour me. Are you ready for that? Because I'm not sure I am. He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine in the open for the first time. My pulse spiked as I glanced around, but no one was watching, yet. I'm not asking you to be fearless, he said softly. I'm asking you to be with me. The silence stretched. A storm of thoughts thundered in my mind. Could I sacrifice the anonymity that had always protected me? Could I endure the scrutiny, the headlines, the constant judgment? But when I looked at him, I knew the truth I already had. The moment I said yes in that library, I had chosen him. Before I could answer, movement at the cafe's entrance drew our attention. A man in a pressed suit entered, eyes scanning the room. My stomach lurched. It was the same advisor from before. Adrian's jaw tightened. Stay calm, he murmured. The advisor approached our table with deliberate steps, his expression unreadable. Your Highness, he said, dipping his head in the barest gesture of respect. I warned you once. And yet here we are. Adrian didn't flinch. Here we are, he echoed. The man's gaze flicked to me, sharp as a blade. You think the kingdom will tolerate this? That the council will remain silent while you risk everything on a distraction? My throat dried. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but Adrian's hand pressed gently against mine beneath the table, steadying me. She's not a distraction, he said, his voice like steel. He's the reason I can finally breathe. The advisor's eyes widened at the slip of pronoun. His silence was louder than words, heavy with judgment. So it's true, he hissed. You're ready to throw centuries of tradition into the fire for this boy. Adrian rose from his chair, towering over the man, his calm composure unraveling into something raw and fierce. For once in my life, I'm ready to live it on my own terms. The advisor straightened, his lips curling into a cold smile. Then you've chosen your war. Do not expect mercy when the kingdom turns its gaze upon you both. With that, he left, his footsteps echoing like a verdict across the cafe floor. Adrian sat down again, his hands trembling slightly as they wrapped around his cup. I couldn't find my voice. Every sound seemed muffled, as though the world had just tilted on its axis. He knows, I whispered. Yes, Adrian said, his jaw tight. And soon they all will. The weight of those words settled between us. My mind raced with visions of flashing cameras, angry headlines, disapproving glances from people who would never understand. But then Adrian's eyes met mine, steady and unyielding. I won't hide you anymore, he said. No matter what comes. Something inside me cracked open then, not fear, but acceptance. He wasn't just choosing me in secret moments. He was willing to face the storm with me at his side. And maybe that was worth everything. Still, as we left the cafe together, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing at the edge of a cliff. The leap was coming. The only question was whether we would fly or fall. The palace balcony stretched out before us like the edge of the world. Below, a sea of faces pressed together, murmurs rippling through the crowd as word spread that the prince himself would speak. The air was heavy with anticipation, the kind that made every breath feel like glass in my lungs. I stood in the shadows of the tall columns, hidden from view, my heart pounding so violently I thought it would echo into the courtyard. Adrian stood near the railing, his hands gripping it tightly. For a moment, he was just a man, not a prince, a man wrestling with fear and love, torn between duty and truth. Then he turned his head, and his eyes found mine in the dim light. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the space between us. "I'm not leaving," I answered, my throat dry but steady. "Not when you're about to walk into fire." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then let's burn together." The trumpets blared, silencing the crowd. The advisor from before hovered near the doorway, his expression carved from stone. Adrian stepped forward into the light, and the murmur of the people grew into a wave of sound, adoration, curiosity, expectation. He raised his hand, and the square fell into silence. "My people," he began, his voice strong despite the tremor I could see in his frame. "For years, you've seen me as a prince, a son of tradition, a symbol of the crown. But tonight I stand before you as something more honest, something fragile, perhaps even dangerous. I stand as myself." The crowd shifted, whispers buzzing like bees. Adrian drew in a long breath. "I have lived under the weight of rules that told me who to love, how to feel, how to exist. I am expected to marry, to carry on a line, to be the perfect heir. But perfection is a prison. And love, true love, cannot grow in chains." My chest tightened as he spoke, every word an arrow aimed at the walls around us. "There is someone who has shown me that love is not weakness," Adrian continued, his voice unwavering now. "That to care for another, openly and without shame, is the bravest act of all. And though it may cost me your favor, though it may break the traditions we have guarded for centuries, I choose honesty. I choose him." A collective gasp surged through the crowd. For a heartbeat, the silence was deafening. Then came the roar, some voices shouting in outrage, others cheering, others too stunned to react. The square became a battlefield of sound. I felt my knees weaken as Adrian turned slightly, his hands stretching back toward the shadows where I stood. The gesture was clear. He wasn't hiding me anymore. He was inviting me into the light. My feet moved before my mind caught up. I stepped out from behind the column, the flood of torchlight blinding, the roar of the people crashing over me. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to protect myself. But Adrian's hand waited, steady and unshaken. When I placed my hand in his, the world seemed to stop. Gasps rippled again, some horrified, some awed. The advisor's face was pale with fury, but Adrian ignored him. He lifted our joined hands into the air as if it were a banner, his chin high, his gaze unyielding. "This is the truth," he declared. "Judge me if you must. But know this, love is not treason. Love is not shame. Love is freedom." The square erupted again, but I barely heard it. My focus was on Adrian's hand gripping mine, warm and unrelenting, grounding me in the storm. Later, in the quiet of his chambers, after the crowd had dispersed in chaos and the council had stormed away in outrage, we sat together by the window. The city below flickered with lanterns, voices rising faintly from the streets. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, I broke the silence. "You just threw centuries of tradition into the fire." Adrian leaned his head against the stone wall, exhaustion etched into his features. "And I'd do it again tomorrow." I laughed softly, the sound raw with relief and fear tangled together. "Do you regret it?" He turned to me then, his eyes weary but shining. How could I regret telling the truth? For once, I am not a prince pretending to be perfect. I am just a man in love. My throat tightened, tears stinging my eyes. "And what happens now?" Adrian reached out, brushing his fingers against mine. "Now we fight. Together. For the right to love openly. For a future built on honesty, not fear." The road ahead would be brutal, I knew it. We would face scorn, politics, maybe even exile. But sitting there with his hand in mine, I also knew something else. We had already won. Because love had survived the fire. And love, I realized, was the only crown worth wearing. If this story touched you, think about what it means to live with honesty in your own life. How many times do we hide our true selves out of fear of judgment? And what might happen if, instead of hiding, we chose love and truth, no matter the cost? If this story inspired you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who believes in the power of love. Because courage, once spoken aloud, has the power to change everything.